Ciao a tutti, we're at day 58 of our wine quarantine, and today is the third part of our trip through Barolo with an exciting tasting of 4 different cru vineyards, very important cru vineyards in the Barolo area. So the crus have never been a way of life in Barolo, although the sense of place was always very important in this area. Of all the vineyard sites officially recognized today, only Cannubi Vineyard was so famous that its name was placed on a wine label as of 1752. The first modern bottlings of Barolo with a cru name appeared in the 1960s. Prior to that, Barolo's history was about the art of blending, meaning that different grapes from different vineyards and different villages were blended together to really create a house style that was so important at the time. In 2010 the consortium introduced the megas, or menzioni geografiche aggiuntive, so geographical additional mentions. There are 181 of these, 170 are single vineyard mentions, and 11 are communal megas. Although this was an important step in the zoning of Barolo's territory, there are still the challenges, knowing that, for example, today there are megas that go from the 1.5 roughly hectares of Bricco Rocche to the 380 hectares of Bricco San Pietro within Monforte. Now, in the midst of all this, some vineyards had already been categorized as of first choice, or prima categoria, by Renato Ratti, such as Rocche, Brunate, Cerequio, Cannubi, Monprivato, Villero, Gabutti Parafada, Lazzarito, and Marenca. So, today, we're going to show you 4 different vineyards we're focusing our attention in, being basically Cannubi, the historical vineyard of all, La Volta, also located in Barolo, Castelletto in Monforte d'Alba, and lastly Falletto, located in Serralunga d'Alba. Now, Cannubi, for example, at least the central part of Cannubi, which is the most historical part, is a vineyard of 19.5 hectares, located at elevation that go between 230 and 290 meters, although the hill of Cannubi is also composed at large by the area known as Cannubi Moscatel, Cannubi San Lorenzo, Cannubi Valletta, and Cannubi Boschis. For the most part, in the central part of Cannubi, vineyards have southeastern exposures, and the wines are distinguished by elegant and austere tannins in their youth. Then we move on to La Volta. La Volta, it's a vineyard of 46.3 hectares in size, elevation higher than Cannubi. We are between 380 and 420 meters, and these are western slopes, for the most part western slopes of Barolo, and wines definitely also here have austerity and a very decent, aromatic intensity. After that, moving on to the eastern part towards Monforte, we are in the vineyard known as Castelletto. Castelletto is a vineyard of 128 hectares that go between 250 and 520 meters of elevation, so quite a bit of variation. That's why the vineyard is almost separated in 2 parts. There's an upper part where there are looser, sandier soils, known for their Barbaros produced there, and then there's a lower part with more compact soils of sandstone matter for the most part, where the wines are more powerful and tannic. And the wines from this area definitely have a strong character and firm edges. After that, we go into Falletto. Falletto is a smaller vineyard of 8.9 hectares. It's a monopole owned by Bruno Giacosa, and elevations here are between 320 and 420 meters. The central part of the Falletto has only southern exposures, whereas the remaining parts have west and southwest exposures, and the wines typically of this area are distinguished by their austere, balanced, and truly inimitable classicism, right? So the 4 wines we're going to taste today, we're going to start with the a Cannubi wine by Michele Chiarlo. So this is Michele Chiarlo Cannubi Barolo 2012. Michele Chiarlo, classic producer since 1956 of the area. They own 1 hectare within the central part of Cannubi, located about 240 meters of elevation. They purchased it in 1989, although these vineyards were planted between 1958 and 1990. The wine is fermented in oak vats of 55 hectoliters in size, and 2012 as a vintage was one of the hottest vintage reserves in the 20 years prior to that vintage, with very hot summers, although fortunately enough generous rainfall in September that really helped a lot the vines. The wine, when we take a look at the color, it's got this beautiful garnet, almost like a fainting ruby red core, and aromatically, fantastic ripe red cherry immediately. Then there's a balsamic note, for sure leather character, and then also spice, a little bit of wet earth, the quintessential notes of a developing Barolo. And the palate, beautiful acidity, great great intensity. The wine has this beautiful rich meat palate where there's a great balance, great harmony, which is really quintessentially Canubi. Very enjoyable glass of wine, extremely silky on the palate, really awesome. Then the next wine will be the Viberti La Volta Barolo Riserva. This is also 2007. So Giovanni Viberti, where now Claudio Viberti, the winemaker, takes care of pretty much all of it. A very young, talented winemaker. They own 2.5 hectares in La Volta, so within the township of Barolo. We are in elevation between 380 and 400 meters. This wine is produced with fruit coming exclusively from southern-facing vineyards, only made, understandably, in the best vintages of Reserva. Here the fermentation, it's only stainless steel, and eventually the wine spends up to 46 months in these neutral vertical tanks known as Tini. 2007 was a vintage, definitely, in which climate was able to prevail over terroir. Also, this wine, when you look at the color, it's got this beautiful garnet rim with fairly dark quartz. This is a little bit darker than the previous wine for sure, although it's still tending to browning. And aromatically speaking, there's merely a red fruit note such as raspberry, but there's also the classic withered rose petal, which is very common with an aging Barolo. And then also more earthy notes, like dried out leaves. There's definitely a clove spice note, but there's also coffee powder and a very beautiful crisp mineral note on the nose. On the palate, definitely plenty of austerity. The tannins here a little bit more muscular. Definitely you find a beautiful sensation of dryness on the palate, sapidity, vibrant acidity, and great texture in the middle of the palate altogether. Moving on to the next wine, we are with the Gianni Gallardo, also Stefano and his brothers Paolo and Alberto. They produce some beautiful Barolos. They are located in La Morra, although this specific vineyard known as Serre, it's located within the Castelletto Cru. So this is a vineyard of roughly 1 hectare located at about 450 meters of elevation. These vineyards are all facing east over the valley. So basically this is the Serralunga Valley that separates Castelletto Vineyard from the other side being Serralunga, the village of Serralunga itself. The wine is fermented in stainless steel and then follows typically 30 months of time spent in large oak casks. This vintage is 2006. 2006 is considered to be a classic vintage, but a tricky vintage at the same time due to the mood swings of that specific vintage. Now we look at the color of this specific wine. As you can see also here, that beautiful classic garnet rim. The core is almost like a tawny pour type of coloration to the core. And let's take a sniff. So this wine has got compared to the others, a lot more black fruit driven, almost like a plum quality, which is very, very pleasant on the nose. But interestingly, also almost like a saline iodine quality, which is quite unique. And then definitely there are the undertones of tar, earthy quality, almost like a spent floral note. So definitely it's a wine that is in a developing stage, but still plenty ahead of itself as far as aromatically speaking. On the palate, also here, the great intensity. The tannins here, they're very sharp, although the wine, and by sharp I don't mean like over the top, but definitely tannins that you can feel them on the palate. The elevation of the vineyards, the cooler condition on this site definitely expresses very well to the tannic structure of this wine, but ultimately still has this beautiful chewy character on the palate. Great food wine for sure. And lastly, we're getting into the Falletto vineyard owned by Bruno Giacosa. This is 2008. So Bruno Giacosa acquired, as I mentioned, is a monopole, so he acquired the whole vineyard in 1980. This is an amphitheater-shaped vineyard, and the actual vineyards are facing southwest, where the fruit from this wine comes from. These vineyards are between 22 and 26 years of age. And also this wine is a stainless steel fermented, and then eventually spends 30 months in French oak botti. So this vintage 2008 was considered to be an excellent vintage that produced wines of great depth, great vitality, and ultimately great aging potential. Let's take a look at the color also of this beautiful Nebbiolo. Also here there's that classic garnet color around the rim. It's very limpid through the core. And let's take a sniff. Extremely vibrant. There's incredible youthfulness in this wine. Plenty of red fruit, specifically raspberry, definitely almost like a juicy strawberry quality, it's very pleasant. Floral aromas just right and left everywhere. But also a very refreshing slight citrus note, which is very cleansing on the nose. And here, classical Serralunga d'Alba, the tannins are massively chewy, but at the same time they have the fantastic elegance that is common with Barolo, meaning that yes, you have this tannic structure that totally coats your palate, but at the same time, great concentration of fruit, beautiful acidity, great salivation on the palate. These are all fantastic wines to really enjoy with some of the classic great dishes, meat-based dishes of Piemonte. So for today, in Alto Cuori, viva il Barolo!